How's it going, wonderful people? Today I want to talk about, for the next few lessons, I want to talk about tides and how tides influence cutthroat feeding behavior. Before we do that, we have to understand coastal cutthroat trouts and their physiology and how their physiology impacts their relationship to the tides and kind of how those two interact. Um, Cutthroat trout are ectothermic animals. That means that their body temperature is controlled by two things. Number one, it's controlled by their environment. In that the water is cold, their body temperature is generally cold. The second factor is their activity level or their mode of operation. When a trout is feeding, it is moving its blood supply and thereby its body heat into its muscular system to bring up its muscular activity to a high enough rate and high enough temperature that it can be really active enough to feed. But they are, again, modal machines. Ectothermic animals cannot feed indefinitely. They feed until their calorie reserve is depleted or until their stomach is full, and then they stop feeding and start digesting. While they're feeding, they're not digesting. They're packing their stomach as full as they can or want, but a lot of times it's as full as they can or as full as they're able to. And then once that calorie reserve is depleted or once the feeding opportunity is gone, they seek out places that they're able to rest and digest. If they just feed continuously, which they don't, but theoretically if they were just to feed continuously, the food would rot inside of their stomach and they'd have to either throw it up or it would cause an infection and kill it. This sounds a little bit weird to us, but we are similar in that we are modal too as an endothermic animal. I'm modal too, but just not as much. If I eat a big meal and then I try to go swimming right afterwards, I'm gonna cramp up because my body has diverted a lot of my blood supply to my digestive system, and I get cramps because my muscles aren't getting the oxygen that they require because a lot of the blood is in my digestive system. This is exaggerated in ectothermic animals like coastal cutthroat trout. So there is a strong relationship between the tides and the mode of operation in trout, in the sound. What I've got here, I took the time to beforehand draw up a little picture of a typical springtime tide. I'm ignoring the nighttime hours because trout hunt visually, so they strongly prefer to hunt during the daytime. This is 0700, 7 o'clock in the morning. This is 1900, 7 o'clock p.m. This is a 15-foot tide. This is a -3. This is a 0. A typical springtime tide might start at 7 o'clock in the morning, and it's going to start earlier and later too, but this is just a typical example. And it's going to be, this looks like maybe a 12-foot tide or a 9-foot tide or whatever. It's going to drop, and then in the middle of the day, it's going to be low and fairly low, and then it's going to come back up almost to the same height that it was in the morning. Sometimes the same, but a lot of times a little bit lower. Nevertheless, the general rise and fall, or I should say fall and rise of the tide, the ebb and the flood of the tide, is fairly congruent. They're almost the same in the daytime hours. However, the behavior of the tide is not the same. Okay, the sound in general, if I can, the general, this is very general, the general behavior of the tides or the topography of the sound is something similar to this, where there's a tidal zone that's kind of flat, and then it drops off, and then it's going to level out. The tide, this isn't really that very clear. Like that. The tidal zone is really right in here. This is the tidal zone. In that water is strongly cohesive, the flowing water down in this area is pulling this down, and as is gravity. So, and if you're fishing the beaches, you've definitely seen this. When the ebb tide is flowing, it's flowing pretty fast in spots where it does flow. If you stand at the same spot in the flood, it's not going to flow as fast because gravity is not pulling it down into this abyss where the main body of water is. Instead, the flood often comes in and rolls uphill, much like the way a toilet bowl fills. If you watch a toilet bowl fill, the water along the slope of the toilet bowl, it's not flowing up, it's kind of rolling up. Like the toilet bowl is like, brr, why is this thing so dry? Kind of like that. It's not nearly that exaggerated. But on the edge of the rising edge of the toilet bowl, there's this little lip here that's created because it's just kind of rolling up like this. Where when it flushes, I know it's flushing much faster, but in the case of the sound, it's going to flow downhill fast, and then it's going to slowly roll back in like this. Okay. Understanding that, or you should go out and observe it for yourself. Observing that, we need to understand, because the trout instinctively know, if I can use that word, they feel the nature of the tides and the seasonality of the tides. So when the tide is in this particular stage right here, when it has strong, consistent flow, they go into feeding mode. The water is flowing, the Bernoulli effect and the Venturi effect are at their strongest, which makes feeding easiest for trout. Okay, so in this 5 or 6 hour window of the ebb tide, the trout are going to be at their highest activity level, meaning they're going to divert almost all of their blood flow and body heat into their muscular system so that they can feed and be very, very active, which is why when you're fishing for cutthroat and they're feeding, they're very aggressive because they have a limited window of activity available to them, because they have a limited calorie reserve that they can use to generate heat and keep the blood flowing to their muscular system. Once this is done, they will become a lot less active, and they're going to spend the rest of the 18 hours of the day trying to find a spot that is safe to rest and allow their digestive system to build the calorie reserve back up so that on the next day they can spend this 5 or 6 hours of time feeding again. Okay, understanding the nature of an ectothermic animal and how its physiology impacts its feeding behavior should have a big impact on your selection of fishing time. Now, not every single cutthroat is going to be able to feed in the prime time. Less dominant cutthroat will be pushed out of prime feeding spots and areas and will have to adjust their feeding behavior. But if you find yourself in the springtime fishing the flood and you're getting very soft takes or very reluctant takes, or you're getting a lot of follows, those are the fish, or that's the way that fish tell you that they're not in active feeding mode. It doesn't mean that they're going to let an opportunity go by, because as they're digesting and a really easy meal comes, sure, they're going to try to get it. But they're less active, they're not feeding as heavily, and quite honestly, it's best for their physiology to leave them alone during a springtime flood so that they can use that opportunity to recover the calories that they've used in the ebb when they're feeding, so that they can prepare to once again feed in the next morning ebb tide. It's better for your catching to fish the ebb in the springtime, and it's better for their physiology. Giving you pearls. Thanks, guys.